everyone. Welcome to episode 3 of season 3 of Dogs Unknown. Today we are talking all about dog parks, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'm joined here today by fellow host Brian Burton and Trina Walsh, who's co-owner of Instinct East Harlem, and Megan Coryat, who's the owner of Instinct Hudson Valley. I'm really excited to have this conversation with both of you. Thanks for joining.
Thank you for having me.
And
yeah, same.
And can I just
Happy
add,
to be
like,
here.
one of the two reasons why I'm excited to have you both on is definitely Megan. Before you opened up Instinct Hudson Valley, you owned Doggedly Devoted in New York City, so you owned your own daycare, so lots of experience with dogs and dog play. And Trina, who's part owner with us at Instinct East Harlem, is like our resident dog expert and does a lot of dog type stuff. So we felt like you two were perfect guests for this as we sort of navigate our way through it.
Exactly. Yes. So wanted to have this discussion because among dog trainers, there's lots of really strong opinions about dog parks and whether to use dog parks and whether dog parks are the worst thing ever invented, or whether they're really helpful. And as dog owners, depending where you live, they can feel like a necessity, or they can feel like a really valuable part of your dog's routine. Or maybe you've had some really terrible experiences, or maybe you're scared to go to the dog park. So we thought it was probably a really great conversation to have in a little bit more detail with, as Brian mentioned, Megan and Trina, who have tons of experience with dog play and dog socialization. And so we're really excited to talk today about dog parks. I feel like we need like dun dun dun.
Yeah, I'll add it. I'll get some royalty-free music. You just heard it if you're listening to the podcast right
now. So to put each of you on the spot, just straight up question, do you use dog parks with your own dogs?
I do, for one out of two. And I think we both enjoy them with some contingencies, which I know we'll kind of chat into later, but I do use
Good
them.
stuff. And you said, Trina, you use with one dog, but not the other, which is notable.
Yeah. So definitely have one of, big guy who just would definitely not enjoy it, but also bring a ton of risk if that was something I kind of pushed on him or even tried to experiment with.
What about you, Megan?
I do not use dog parks. I have big opinions.
We love that.
Yeah. We don't use them either.
No, we have.
We have in the past. Yeah.
I've been in a dog park. I'm familiar with dog parks. And I've enjoyed them in the past too. But honestly, it's been an evolution. And I feel like the more I learn, the less comfortable I personally am in the dog park.
Yeah. And I would sort of echo that too. Like we don't really go to dog parks anymore, but we were also lucky enough to have a yard, which is a big part of that. So if I didn't have a yard and we were still in the city, as opposed to, out here in Westchester, it might be a different situation. But to your point, like the longer I do this, the more dog parks make me nervous, while at the same time recognizing that it can be a great outlet for some dogs. But there's just so much risk. And just to sort of, this whole conversation is, we get to see all the horror stories from dog parks because people come to us for help after their dog has bitten dogs or bitten multiple dogs, or someone's been attacked at the dog run and those types of things. So I know like our experience is going to be like a little bit skewed. So I do want to just put that out there as well, that I think that's that might not even be a healthy thing, but just to sort of preface that as we go into this. So
it's true. If someone's like loves dog parks and has a great experience and nothing ever goes wrong for them, why would you call in a behavior consultant? Like,
right. Exactly.
We have a biased slice that we're looking at.
Yes.
Yeah. And I definitely think I kind of come to from I definitely select the dog parks that I find. And I think New York City, I can see where there's a lot of just conflict that kind of comes up, or you don't know until it happens. And I think that's where I would agree a lot of our clients come to us and kind of go, just wasn't expecting that. So outside of New York City, I'm up in Westchester too. So I definitely look for places with space, but And even though with those horror stories too, I definitely also see where sometimes it's like such a great outlet, and how you kind of navigate that safely, which is such a
It is. Well, I think you
big
kind of brought it
question.
up, Trina. I would love to, maybe we can start with, what are some of the potential benefits to using a dog park? You know, what are some of the situations where we might recommend it or endorse it, I guess, with clients as an activity, even if we're not outright recommending it? What are some of the benefits that it can bring to people and their dogs?
I mean, I feel like the physical outlet is usually number one. I think when I kind of, and this is definitely muddled, is like socialization, and that's definitely a bit of a rabbit hole to go into. But I do think it gives a lot of, especially for those really pro-social dogs that get such enjoyment out of it. And again, it's safe. I'm like already kind of thinking of like all the ways where that can go wrong. But looking at those two benefits of physical exercise and meeting dog friends, and I know there's so many little, especially coming out of New York City, or I'm assuming other urban spots, but like those little doggy meetups, which I know people love and adore and also kind of depend on too. I know coming out of COVID, when those all kind of got shut down, I heard that so frequently where I was like, man, like my dog doesn't get this, doesn't have this outlet anymore. Missing their dog friends. But I would probably put those at the top of my list.
Yeah.
There's some really beautiful dog parks in Westchester that are very kind of large, like a huge fenced-in area. And they can be really great for working on training, especially if you can hit them at a time when they're not going to be crowded and there's not going to be so many people there. Like, where else are you going to get that much space to work on recall that's fully
Safe.
Enclosed and safe?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great one.
I think those are big ones. That sort of that physical exercise, and physical exercise in a place where it is like fenced and safe, where they can kind of move their body freely and run around, where they may not get the opportunity to do that otherwise. And then I love the note about training, Megan, if you're selective about when you do it. And then letting people go so that their dog can play with other dogs and get exercise. I think those are the two big ones we hear, especially if we're bringing up the potential of maybe moving away from dog park use or cutting it down. Those are big concerns for folks. Well, how am I going to get them enough exercise? And I feel they really need to play with dogs.
Yeah. And it's, and to touch on Trina's point, like, and I've heard this from clients as well about just the sense of community that people have. So about like the human need of dog parks. Like, I think there's a lot of people where like, they move to the city. That's where like the people that they know are, that's where they get to connect with people, and, in between going to work and doing all of their other things. And I do know I've had a couple of clients where we talked about, taking the dog park visits down. And that was like some of the areas that impacted them. So just to recognize Trina's points, point on that, for some people there's a social component, and it's more about like they enjoy the dog park, which you have to ask yourself different questions about that. But that's absolutely true in my experience.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can definitely think back to like my young college self, where dog parks were so much fun, and like you had like your little dog park circle of friends. It does feel very far away removed from there right now. I think if I look at someone who's entered their 30s, where dog park is like eyes around my dog. But yeah, I think it's an awesome point for dog owners to have that.
So I mean, that's some of the. Have we missed anything in terms of the good? I don't kind of the benefits.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it. I was just going to say, like, and the other thing too is just, and especially for city dogs, I know, New York City and some of our other places, it's like the only area that these dogs can actually go off leash. And we'll talk about some other alternatives, but I think for a lot of people, it's like, there's a lot of people where that's sort of like their only opportunity to do that. And there's workarounds, but, I think that's sort of the other benefit of dogs are actually getting a chance to sniff and explore, on top of exercise and socialization. Just being free outside and can also be good. But I think that's it.
Yeah. So the next question is kind of a big one. We might spend a big hunk of the episode on it, but we'll see. But what do you feel like what are some of the risks and issues that you see from dog park use?
And take out my briefcase here.
Yeah, Giardia.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, health issues.
Health issues.
I love that I would not have brought that one first, Megan, but
big.
it definitely is one. Yeah.
I've done some puppy raising. I live in the city, and I've been doing some puppy raising, and Giardia is for real.
Yeah.
Yeah. And those communal water bowls and just all sorts of nastiness. But I would kind of probably maybe go with the first one where there's probably just a lot of, I would say I would kind of put traumatic experiences for some dogs, even whether they're the aggressor or they've just been aggressed on wrong dog at the wrong time. That sticks out to me. I think, again, coming from a behavior consultant point of view of, yes, that really did kind of set the stage then for the remainder of their, young or, young adult life that carries with them. But then also kind of finding out, hey, my dog doesn't like this, or has a heavy bite history now because of 2 or 3 dog park visits. So I think those on both sides of when dogs kind of experience that, how that negatively affects you and also is not a good point of a dog parks.
And maybe if we even think about it, like dog parks compared to, what are the risks of a dog park compared to, say, like maybe going to a well-run dog daycare, or maybe having play dates in a backyard, or maybe even going to, say, like, I think there's probably some overlap here, but going to like an off-leash dog beach that's like huge and unfenced and pretty, the density of dogs there is pretty low. Like what are the dog park specific risks? I totally would agree with you, Trina, that like there's traumatic opportunity for some pretty traumatic experiences and fights. What about dog parks presents specific risks that are maybe different?
Yeah. Go ahead, Trina.
I was gonna say, I think there's just like a big unknown factor. I know you can still get this in daycares, but I do think there's more chance given to your dog at the dog park. You may not know. You may have just recently adopted. You may have, brought a dog in from like a, foster home or a family member or friend's home, and you kind of just wing it. And I get that can be an experimental time that just puts a lot of other dogs and people at risk. So for me, it would be kind of that question mark of behavior history, dog preferences, tolerance levels. But I know, again, you can still get it at daycare. I think it's just far less because there's evaluations and there's, then there's like vaccine history, like some of that, health requirements are nice from like coming from a daycare. It's obviously more controlled, but I know volume still plays a role and space can play a role there. But that's where I would go. I'd be curious too with Megan, with your thoughts on that.
I think a well-run daycare, I don't know if it's always like common, right? Like I'm not sure how many of them there are that are just really truly thoughtful in like how they're putting together play groups and how much rest time they're giving. So there's that, right? So I'm not sure that daycare is always a good solution. But when you go into a dog park, your dog might be the unknown factor, or maybe your dog is the known factor and somebody else has their foster dog. Sorry, I keep hitting my desk. Somebody else has their foster dog there, and then your dog is the one being experimented on. Like, oh, does this dog like playing? I don't know. And then we find out, and then it's like your dog who was pretty chill before now suddenly has had a bad experience.
I agree with you, Megan. And Trina, I think that question mark, the level of unknown component, I think is one of the biggest ones. And especially having done this for a really long time, I think the reality is there's people out there, I don't even know if experimenting is the right word. There are people out there testing and finding out, hey, is my dog social, by bringing them to the dog park like a newly adopted dog. There are also, let's all be frank, a whole host of owners who bring dogs into dog parks who have very significant bite histories, who have put dogs into needed medical attention, serious injuries, who continue to go back because it doesn't happen every time. It happens once every 3 to 4 months. It happened because there was a ball, right? Like there's all these reasons and sort of rationalizations. And I don't even mean to throw those. If you're one of those owners, I don't even mean to throw you under the the bus, right? Like you're doing it probably because you think your dog needs exercise. You think they get some level of enjoyment out of it. But the reality is it does present a very real risk. And that happens all the time.
And I mean, we've absolutely seen multiple cases of that. And when we talk about bites, like the ones we're thinking about, just so people know, like these aren't just like, oh, it's just like a little nick or like a small puncture, which is still serious. Like some of them are actually much more serious, and has been doing that on a routine. And there's almost like no recognition there of like how serious it is. So,
and the impact on the other dogs.
Or they think like, oh, dogs get in fights sometimes.
Yeah.
So I do think that's a huge one, is knowing that, especially depending on your, your location and where you're going, that can be what you're walking into. And so I think that's a risk to internalize.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean never use them, but it is a risk to internalize. I think the other one, compared to say like a play date with a couple of dogs that we know, is one thing, or also like a daycare, is sort of that supervision component, right? Like there's going to be different levels of that given by different owners in the park. Some, like Trina, you mentioned, are like, eyes on my dog, I'm following you around, but you still can't supervise every dog, nor some owners probably get a little testy if you started to try to like supervise their dog as well, direct their behavior. And some owners really do approach it with that mindset. I'm going to watch everything, we intervene if needed, call my dog away. And other folks just, maybe because they have a really easy, like a dog who's generally really easy, or maybe because they're using it as a social activity for themselves, are pretty checked out, right? Like they're on their phone or they're talking to someone else and they're really not watching. So I think the lack of kind of oversight and supervision that's often present in dog parks for dog socialization is also pretty risky.
And can I add, sometimes even when people are doing their very best and everyone has an agreement in the dog park that we're going to watch our dogs, if they don't know what to watch for and they don't know when to intervene, then it doesn't matter that they were watching. Oh, we watched the whole fight unfold. We were right there.
Yeah.
I know perception's a big thing. And as someone who's kind of enjoyed looking at dog parks too, whenever I do travel, kind of like looking at what different states have. One, and this kind of just popped up for me yesterday, where it was kind of the shock that sometimes there's just a lot of young children at dog parks. And again, being in those shoes myself, I'm going, whoa, I'm not sure how my dog's going to take this. I've never given him this opportunity. Like, this has never been something he's been exposed to. And like, yes, maybe a little bit having that wherewithal, like, all right, I'm just going to leash you up and we're going to head out. Again, even though I think that's just something I wouldn't have to worry about if there was something more controlled, or like, again, in a daycare, there's so much that can happen in those dog parks, or like young kids who may be appropriate to be in there, but like running, or people getting really, really excited when they see their puppies playing or their young dogs playing, and their kind of body language and their tone of voice can get, a dog 10 feet away really excited too, and like, let me go, I don't know, investigate in their own little fun way. But that I've seen sometimes those situations unfold, and I just would have never have thought of that. I would have never created that thought in my mind until you see it. So that brings a whole other level of risk that I kind of think about when the human involvement too, which I know Megan kind of touched on just now, on how they perceive like dog interactions, or what could have been a super low level scuffle, and like kind of getting involved can kind of turn into like hands being nipped at, or agitation building, which I'm sure we've all seen in different forms too. But that's one that always kind of sits really uneasy with me, and it's a pretty good indicator for me. Like, it's time to head out.
And I mean, the thing too about, you mentioned just about like when to step in, like, so if the dogs are starting to get into a scuffle, I mean, that's inherently subjective. Right. I mean, it's very hard to have objective criteria unless it's like they just start to do something. And then it's like, sometimes we can actually get in the way of things as well. And then there's times like we don't step in soon enough and things definitely go sideways. And to expect everyone in the dog run to have like the same expectations about that is really hard, or like the same know-how. So, and I remember too, like there were, the one we used to go to, and there was just, and it's, again, not the dog's fault, but the dog would kind of come in and be like humping everyone, and the person would be like reading their newspaper, and you would see this person coming with their dog, and no one really minded the dog, but like people would get up and leave the dog park when they saw like this person coming, because it was like the whole vibe got thrown off, and like there was no stepping in there, and so yeah, like sort of that the people, like we always talk about, you have to go to the dog park with the expectation that you might not go in, or you might leave early based on who's there or who might come. And you have to like take that very, very seriously, and trust your spidey senses on it, because waiting too long or just trying to test things, like you have to listen to your spidey senses with dog runs. I think that's the big thing we have to teach people, is like you have to listen to those spidey senses. And if a dog or an owner is just not the right fit, then definitely leave. But yeah,
I agree with that. I feel like, and this is probably location specific, sort of our reference point for dog runs in New York City is that they're little like postage stamp size rings. They're like these tiny little pieces of property that are fenced in, and
they're dog yards.
They're small dog yards.
Very small.
Yeah. Whereas, I know there's folks in other parts of the country who, and even Megan, like you mentioned, where like dog parks can be like 1, 2, 3 acres of space, which is just an entirely different experience, I would have to assume. A little bit harder if your dog tends to wander off and doesn't come when called, but maybe better because perhaps folks are less likely to take their dog who doesn't come when called to that bigger dog park. Whereas I know in some of these more urban places can have dogs where you regularly see folks like having a really hard time getting their dog leashed up to leave.
Oh yeah.
So when we say, hey, if you see someone come in who's not a good match and head out, like that's the other thing to be mindful of, is there's also dogs in there who, are really difficult to wrangle. I think one of the other risks that I see of just the physical design of dog parks, and speaking more about sort of the smaller ones, is that setup where like everyone just the dog gets rushed at the entry point where they come in. Like everyone can see that there's a new dog coming, and you open the gate, there's high levels of arousal, and there's like 12 to 15 dogs on the other side, like many of whom are quite stiff and uncertain. And the dog coming in, regardless, is often pretty stiff too if you watch them, because like they have 15 other dogs coming up and inspecting whether they're going to welcome them into the group or not. So I feel like that's sort of like initiation into the dog run, like the way that it's set up can be can make fights and scuffles a lot more likely and just presents a risk.
Yeah. And I'll just add to that. Like, I think the other thing, yes, I think the size plays into that. And the other part about kind of them all rushing the dog, like I feel like because they're smaller, and when you go, it tends to be the same group of dogs. I feel like for some dogs, that dog park becomes like their territory or their home. So they can be just like, I find a little bit like, whereas if they were on like more neutral territory, sometimes you're less likely to have like conflict that gets out of hand. I do feel like some of those dogs, it almost becomes like an extension of their home or their backyard, with like dogs walking by the dog park and who's coming in. And it's like
their little club. And then,
and they have like their little Department of Homeland Security there. That's like, welcoming everyone into the dog run. So I think that's one of the downsides of the small size.
Yeah. Especially when they I would say, especially when they have like their little, doggy friends that they meet, it's like they can kind of, they definitely can form their little Homeland Security. And I would have to, I also kind of feel like that's where I hear a lot of, serious things happen. The introduction to a dog park, sometimes an introduction to a daycare, into a run or a playroom, depending on what they term it. But I feel like that's such a good point with dog parks, where that can really cause a lot of conflict, cause a lot of trauma, injury, but it also can definitely, from a human perspective, kind of go, I'm not going to subject my dog to that again. Especially when you look at those smaller to medium-sized breeds that just like look terrified, because it's a tough initiation, even then to kind of get into the area and then kind of be sometimes chased after. And we talk about social skills, but some dogs don't get it, that if they just kind of stop and slow down, the dogs will leave them alone. But that kind of continuous running gets, everyone kind of gets, most of the dogs will get charged up, and then you'll start seeing nipping at flanks, and no good stuff happens after that. But it can look fun. can look a lot of fun.
Oh, they're all running together.
Where, like, the dogs are running. Oh, yes. And meanwhile, you're kind of looking at that dog who's like probably feels like they're running for their life and not finding where they can go. Or sometimes those like park benches can create some issues there under something's trying to get to the smaller dog.
Well, it's like a wrestling ring, right? Like there's really nowhere to
even
go.
like
it's like a wrestling ring with a cup, maybe a bench in there. But like, like if it's like one of those bigger ones, like, yeah, you can like run away, or maybe there's more like hiding spaces or places where you kind of stand off by yourself. Like, and especially if you're the new kid coming in, like there's nowhere to hide. And yeah.
Agreed.
Absolutely. And that also too, like I know you talked about the size of the dogs, like that also for me, because with our little rat terriers, like, and just because of some of the stories that we've heard, smaller dogs can get really hurt or worse in dog runs, especially if there's like bigger dogs there, just because even just getting, trampled on, let alone if a fight breaks out and they're just a lot smaller. So I will also say, like, for me personally, like taking my rat terriers into a dog run, I would generally only do it at this point in my life if it was like a small dog, like appropriate size one. Like I know like Carl Schur's Park on the Upper East Side has like a small dog run, which I actually used to enjoy going to that one because I felt like it was pretty laid back.
Maybe that leads into, as we move into, like, we're still kind of talking about risk, but what do people do about it? Like what are mistakes to avoid, or what are some things you can do if you're going to the park to sort of reduce your risk and make it more likely that your dog has a positive experience? Because I 100% agree. One of the big ones is please, please, please do not under any circumstances take your small breed dog into all sizes of dogs dog run, or the big dog area, because you think because we've just heard it so much, you're like, oh, they like the big dogs better. They might, but please don't take your small breed dog into a large breed dog run. The risk is just so high. There's a reason why most daycares separate by size. We at Instinct, with all our play groups, are super strict, truthfully, and conservative about breaking up dogs by size, even within, like, if you're a 10-pound dog versus if you're a 35-pound dog, let alone if you're a 10-pound dog versus you're an 80-pound dog.
Yeah.
And as Brian, as you mentioned, like sometimes it's just incidental contact, and how devastating that can be to, like, if like a 100-pound American bulldog steamrolls over a 10-pound dog, they can get really hurt. But also if fights break out, that can have really, really awful consequences. So I feel like that's a huge one, is go to the size appropriate run
100%
with your dog. It's a big one. What are some other, for you all, kind of best practices, I guess, to keep in mind, or mistakes? You can phrase it as maybe like mistakes that you see people make going into a run that maybe sets their dog up for failure, or sets other dogs up for failure. Or, like, if you want to keep it in the positive, what are some best practices to keep in mind? Either way, don't do this, do this.
Yeah. Everyone should practice recalls with their dogs 20 times before they do the recall where they're going to take them home. Recall, good job. Okay, go play.
Yeah, I would echo you.
So working on.
Yeah.
So that you don't have that thing where you're chasing your dog around trying to get to. If you only call your dog to you when it's time to leave, then your dog will not come to you. So every trip to a dog park should be a training session on recall. Recall out of play, recall out of no good reason, recall out of sniffing that squirrel going up the tree. And then, okay, now go back to it, just so that you don't have that difficulty at the end of and that unpleasant experience of trying to capture your dog.
Yeah. That would definitely be at the top of my list. I think as a dog owner, I also think that allowed me I like the trust aspect, but I do like to be able, for my dog Murphy, where he's largely social with dogs. Well, that's those subset of dogs where I'm like, I know you don't know how to get out of that situation. Recall has been, I think, the only way we were able to get back into dog parks when he was at the height of his adolescence, coming into like after 2 or 2 years old. But I think I also see it so frequently at dog parks. And then that's kind of my first intro when I'm looking at building to help folks at Instinct to kind of get their dogs back into doing any type of dog play, whether it is a more controlled setup or it is in a dog park setting or someone's backyard. But is to kind of have that nice or like sharp response time. My second would be, and I've recently kind of been dealing with this too, where I've been fostering like a young shepherd who I think seeing these two boys get together, their shoulders seem more forward. They kind of puffing out their chest more right before we enter that park. Is sometimes I'm like, we're not going to enter that way. We are going to keep walking, and I'm going to look like that person in the parking lot walking in circles. Just until they can kind of lower some of the hikes. And I get it. They're excited. There's some higher arousal, but that is kind of the moment they're going to make impact with that first dog. I'm like, what's the chances here that's going to be okay? What's the chances of how that dog's going to perceive that? And also, like, I wouldn't want someone else's dog coming in like that either, hot and heavy. And it does work. It definitely, it took me 2 or 3 reps before I'm like, all right, now you guys can, again, you can feel your excitement. You can start to self-settle. Again, and there's a lot of backlog of some, that recall is really nice for both of them. I think they understand some of those leash dynamics, but I think ultimately there was like, okay, this isn't optional. I'm going to have to slow down or we're not getting in. And there was one time where we just didn't go because the feelings were too high and I decided my frustrations were too high.
I'm sure the shepherd was really quiet about that, right, Trina? There was no yelling or barking or anything. Oh, yeah. Because shepherds never do that when they're overexcited.
Yeah. I'm like, even just sometimes the look of the eye, because I think they were like, I think one of my favorite things that kind of build on dogs is like the unprompted attention. So there was a ton of like, are we not going in? And then that hopefully coming out. And then, I can humor myself, but yeah, there was a lot of eyes on me in that kind of context because I did have a pretty loud shepherd. I had this really cute spotted cattle dog kind of wanting to just charge towards the entry of the gates. And I know the dynamic there was both of them. And I think if you have that one dog that's still feeling like that, I think it's still really important to kind of help your dog feel that or go through those feelings. Anyway, the Big Feelings Club is real. And I think even with recalls, let's say your recall is pretty defined, it's kind of nice. Sometimes they just that won't cut through the static of what's going on in their mind. So that can lead to some mistakes, but it can also prevent them.
I love that.
How I look at it.
Oh, sorry, Megan. Do you want to go ahead?
I have a question, Trina. When you're doing this work and you're working on your recalls and you're asking for your eyes on me, do you bring food to the dog park?
Ooh, such a good question. Because that can. So going back to like really large dog parks, yes, I think I can kind of use at the beginning or at the end towards the entry. I also will take the longer walk to the dog park. I'll park a few blocks away. So I think that kind of helps. 9.5 out of 10 times will never bring food into a dog park. Mostly just because I don't want to get mugged by some Labrador usually. Sorry to shout out my lab friends, but yeah, I definitely do not want to do that. But I think sometimes for training elements, kind of finding out where the sweet spot is. But yeah, such a good question, Megan, because I do like to reward good behaviors, but I definitely do not want to cause unnecessary unwanted ones.
Well, that leads into, I think, probably one of the other, like, how do you manage risk, or how do you, like, what are best practices? Because we've all seen, and I think we've probably all done it at least once, where you like went in with your, like, at some point in your training career, you go in with your treat bag and you're like, I'm going to work on recall. Terrible idea. Like, reality comes crashing down. And so I would love to hear people's thoughts on, like, well, how do we help dog owners? Like, if you are working, we just finished talking about how important it is to have a great recall, like that your dog will come and call. Well, one of the most common ways to reward that is with food. And I don't want to sideline us, but I think that would be interesting to talk about. But I love that one, Trina, just kind of circling back to that, like, moderating or bringing down sort of the arousal level and getting some sort of kind of emotional regulation before you go in, so that they're not just shot out of a cannon coming in with all this energy going into what we already talked about, is like the dog gauntlet. That's just a recipe for those, like, just, you can just see like the dust cloud with the, the stars and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Like, there's just, and I think on that same line, when possible, like, if you're going to the dog park, like, if you're like the weekend dog park aficionado, or that's sort of like, that's their outing and they're going to get all their energy out, you'll really help your dog and do your dog a favor, and also do the other dogs in the run a favor if you actually get some of that energy out before you go. Like, actually exercise your dog before you go to the dog run, which sounds counterintuitive if you're taking them to get exercise, but let them at least take the edge off so that they're not, because otherwise they come in and because of excitement, because of maybe a little bit of stress, and because of pent up energy, they come in and do those like 4 to 5 to 6 to 8 big like zooming laps around the perimeter of the dog park. And that invites a lot of unwanted attention and can lead to scuffles. So getting some of that energy out first, then as Trina, as you said too, doing some work before you go in to just bring down some of the physiological arousal can be super helpful. Do a little bit of settling work. You have to play with distance there. I find like you have to be far enough away. Otherwise it can just be an exercise in agitation. Right? Like where I'm going to settle you 2 feet outside the dog run while the other dogs are looking at you and barking, and your dog's just like whining and all worked up. So you need to give yourself some space to do that and give your dog some space to do that effectively.
Yeah. Especially like in urban settings too. And I think it'll also kind of help with dogs just learning to pull towards the dog park, which I know we hear a lot, especially in the city where they know, all right, 2 blocks over, 1 avenue across, we're going to the dog park. So sometimes kind of like that distance, being able to kind of find that under threshold spot where they can kind of learn and then again, like moderate some of those high emotional feelings. I think it is a great exercise to do. And it does kind of burn down that overexcitement, but also again, like you said, exercise your dog before you get there.
And I was just going to say something about that, and I totally lost my train of thought, but I guess I'll have to come back to it because, yes, I know what it was. It was just, I think it's important for people to recognize, because I don't think this is common knowledge, but like when dogs or animals or people are really excited, it's much easier to tip into scuffles and fights and aggression. Excitation transfer, like it's studied in people, it's studied in animals. High arousal should, especially like if your dog has tendencies to do that, should be a sign like, hey, I might need to wait a little bit longer for that to come down. Because if they go in, even if they get a little bit more excited, at least if they're not coming in at an 11 out of 10, like if they can go in at a 4 out of 10 or a 5 out of 10, it will make a big difference. And the other thing that can happen, I think, and you've seen this, is if they get to just sort of go into the dog park, that 11 out of 10, like you almost get like a sensitization effect happening where it's just like every time they go, they're almost getting like more excited, more excited, more excited. So you have to be really, really careful with that, knowing that we want the dogs to have fun. Like you don't expect them to go in and, look like they're wallflowers, right?
Like open up a newspaper with their sip on their cup of coffee. Like some will do that, but a lot are going to be excited when they go in.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yeah. But I did want to just bring that up because that point about why that excitement, for us, it's always so clear, like it brings risk into the situation. And I think for a lot of owners, it's annoying. It's like,
or
they don't
it's
see the
neat.
risk.
Look how happy and excited they are.
Well, yes, absolutely.
To go to the park.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And especially even like with those zoomies that you said, because a lot of times it's like, well, like they like it. And it's like, well, they're now hiding under a bench. So like I like just because they're doing it doesn't mean they like it, or just because it looks fun, you really have to look at that body language. And
even if, which most times they don't, even if for some reason that dog was having the most amazing time zooming around the park, it invites some very unwanted attention and it puts your dog at risk from the attention that it attracts from others because of that level of energy that they're bringing.
Yes.
Yeah. One of the other big ones that I always remember that we always were really mindful of with our own dogs and that we always kind of coached clients on when they were using a dog park was when you're in there to keep moving, walk around and move versus sort of stationing yourself in one spot, sitting on a bench or standing still, just because depending on the dog you have and their personality and some of their traits and other dogs, it can be a lot more likely that they can maybe get a little bit guardy or protective of that space.
Yes.
When other dogs approach and come up into it because you've sort of set up camp in one spot. So especially if your dog decides to like lay under the bench, on the bench underneath you, or sit on the bench beside you. So you don't have to like, you're not power walking or anything, but just sort of stroll around, and keep moving. And that can really reduce the risk of scuffles when other dogs approach your dog.
It can.
A ton.
And it impacts more dogs than you think it does. I feel like
If you walk too purposefully, you may find yourself like the Pied Piper with like a little parade of dogs following you around because they'll be like, "Hey, what are you doing?" And
This
then
looks like fun.
But that's not the worst thing in the world. But just sort of stroll.
Yes.
About.
Huge difference.
Huge.
Yeah. I don't even know if I looked at it that way until this moment. I'm like, yeah, that's actually something I find myself having to practice as a dog owner. Maybe this is something that, again, working with Instinct for so long, I'm like, maybe we never kind of, when we're doing those awesome play groups, like maybe we do always kind of like,
and how
keep
often,
us moving.
I'm sorry, Trina, go ahead.
I know like that stationary, like just like, the whole, like they'll play right on top of you and just kind of like, all right, let's give them some space because that is where we're going to see something.
Mm-hmm. Like how often have we called out to team members who are maybe new and learning, like, move. Okay, move.
Yes.
Step back, move. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's just like a small adjustment if you're not currently doing it that you can make that can really reduce risk for your dog and for you when going to the park.
Yeah.
I don't know if anyone has anything else to add on that, but
about safe stuff.
Oh, just about the keeping moving. Like
keeping moving.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's really important.
Yeah. If I feel like, to Megan's point about recalls, I think that's it definitely helps quite a bit. And I know like the food question is like, bringing food into a dog park, yay or nay. And I know we're probably always going to hear the nay. I found some helping, like sometimes using when your dog's really thirsty, that can be a nice reward for recall. But I know like you have to like use it on special times and you can't use it 10 times in a row or 3 times in a row. But if you're ever kind of looking for like a way to reward your dog with it's like the only time I think I've ever used water as a like as a reward, but it can be helpful even if you're looking at like trying to just build that, whether it's in a dog park or kind of next,
and
a few blocks away from the dog park.
If they're, if we would always want them to just have access to water and take a drink, but if you have a dog who's like when they wanted to, but if you have a dog who just really, to your point, like really likes water, and maybe the idea of like squirting a water bottle into their mouth, if you have again not like a lab or someone like that where they just think that's really fun, like that could work really well. That's probably not a solution for the majority of dogs, but it could be for some who just find water fun.
Yeah, especially like in those like smaller dog parks where they tend to have those communal ones too, which I try to avoid. But it's like you definitely want them to have their access to the water. Trying to kind of think of ways you can build recall. I feel like
a lot of. Oh yeah, I was going to say I feel like a lot of that, if we're using it sort of judiciously, if we're not overusing it in the park, but we're also being mindful not to just use it when we're leaving. I feel like sometimes it can be helpful to really, in your practice outside the dog run, train some like good solid delays between the recall and the reinforcement slowly over time, and build in a lot of play and movement in conjunction with the food so that they get used to like part of the reward is play and chase and come and get me. And then the food comes out after a longer period of that can sort of carry you over into the dog run. That's more of a training specific thing, but I think there's just ways to know that we can work on recall and not necessarily have to bring steak into the dog run and all the attention that it invites.
Yeah. And I think it's important, even if your dog has a good recall, because I know like the food thing is, you got to be really careful with that. And there's also two different people use food in the dog park in two different ways. Like some really try to be pretty sneaky about it and they're pretty good at it. And then other people are just like, it's like the buffet and they're like feeding everyone. And so like, we're not talking about that, but yeah, in general, I would say, have I always not brought treats in the dog run? No. There's definitely times I have, but it was usually because I knew the dog run, the time of day, who was in there, blah, blah, blah. So same as you, 9.5 times out of 10, I'm not going to do that. It's also important, I think, to have ways to get your dog out of the dog run without needing recall, because you want recall, and obviously that's what you're going to use. I do think it's important, like if like a scuffle starts to happen where they might not just hear that, like your dog being comfortable, like having a finger through the loop of their collar and being like led away. like that, like,
You're saying if they're sort of at the outskirts of a scuffle.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you're on
Not
the
if they're in the middle of a scuffle.
well, no,
Just
of course
no,
not.
I know. I just
Yeah.
want to clarify that for folks. Like, don't,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Don't, yeah. Right. But I mean, like if there's times you're just like, hey, we need to get out of here and they're sort of distracted, like them being comfortable with you just having to lead them out because you have to get out quickly. Or it might be like you see the person coming where we used to all run. Like, okay, Sammy, let's go. And it's like, you know, and he would usually follow, but there were times like, hey, I need you to go because he was busy doing something. The other thing I've seen people do, and you have to be careful with this too, is like they put the leash on to take their dog out, which sounds like a really good idea. It can bring negative attention from some other dogs, like because they see a dog on leash, either because they've been conditioned to, when they see a dog on leash, they're frustrated or whatever. I don't know why, but they become a target. And it's not something that was like super rare. Like when you saw that happen. So, that's sort of the other thing I would just say, you know, just to be careful at, but having a way, I think, to get your dog out quickly. And that would just mean like, you know, practicing putting your finger through their collar and they know if they walk with you, they get food, but just getting them used to like, oh, if I feel that, it's not a big deal. Cause I do feel like having that is a really nice thing to have. Again, not in the middle of a big dog fight, but if you just need to get them out quickly and they might be distracted or someone's coming in, I do feel like that can be, having a game plan for that and you practiced it a bit can be really nice.
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially if your dog is like, that's the precursor to like, I'm going to run from you and catch me if you can. And similarly, it's like not putting a leash on is not picking them up either.
Yes.
A lot of dogs tend to like, I don't know why, but they, or maybe I can sometimes take a look at like, I get the excitement of like jumping and nipping at some dogs, but that can definitely lead you down a path where like, then you end up running out of the dog park.
And there's some bad stories about people picking up dogs in dog parks and other dogs getting a hold of them, especially little dogs. So you have to be very, very careful.
Yeah.
Like, very careful about that. I would definitely recommend not picking up your dog unless it's like you feel like it's a life or death situation. And if you pick up your dog, you're also probably going to get bit too. So it's, you have to be really careful. Yeah. So I would agree with that. I'm glad you brought that up, Trina, because that's like really, you gotta be really, really careful about picking your dog up. Would not recommend that.
And I know like, you know, it does kind of limit you then to like, what can you kind of do? So it, you know, kind of doing all that legwork beforehand is just you are going to be super happy. And I know I've been in that situation. And Brian, like that little, you know, loop on the collar, like sometimes I kind of find my dog Murph sometimes he'll fixate or he'll kind of just be staring. And I'm like, you know what, bud, if I can just turn you around this way. Sometimes it is just that collar touch where I would, instead of getting him actually more excited or aroused or, you know, like just in that hyper state that I don't want to, I actually can, it's like his really nice cue, like, oh yeah, just go this way. And it did take, I will say that took some time. So that, you know, some dog owners might find that too, but man, actually I love that I did that for him. Cause there's a lot of things that I think wouldn't have allowed him to be a safe dog to be back in there if he had kind of gone through adolescence just doing bad boy
adolescent dog stuff. Yeah. Well, I think that's summed up. I'm glad that we talked about it because it's really important that your dog is comfortable and happy coming to you. And it's also really important that your dog is comfortable having you come to get them is sort of what we're saying, right? Like that they should really be comfortable with both because there's going to be times and situations where one or the other is more appropriate. Yeah, I agree. I think one of the other ones, and this is maybe controversial, and I'm curious to hear folks' opinions on it, but is like, I would be really happy if dog parks just didn't allow toys. No toys in the dog park.
Toys are hard.
Full stop. You get banned if you take toys in. Like, you get one warning.
But my dog only likes to chase the ball.
Right. And that's probably exactly. Yeah. And I get it. It's like, that's the only time they can be off leash. It's such a common source of fights, such a common source of fights. And that just because your dog, like toy play between dogs is actually super fun and lovely and be really healthy. Generally speaking, that's safest and best done if the dogs actually have some sort of relationship history with each other and they're playing together. And otherwise it's just way too easy for it to be a resource to fight over. Is one thing. The other thing is, I think, Megan, you just touched on, is there are also a lot of dogs who get taken to the dog park who actually don't really like other dogs and aren't terribly comfortable around them. Or I should say, don't enjoy socializing with dogs in that dog park setting.
Yeah. Yes.
Right. But like they need to get their energy out. So they get taken to the run to play fetch. And so if another dog tries to interfere with that activity, they already don't really want to interact with the dogs to begin with, and they have a valuable resource. So I feel like it can mask some of the avoidance behaviors that people would otherwise see. There'd otherwise be some pretty clear signals that their dog doesn't want to be in there.
Yeah.
But because they're playing fetch, they'll just stay and
Yeah.
play focused on the ball. Just so then another dog tries to join in,
And I
like,
do understand.
explosion happens.
Yeah. And I can definitely see where for a lot of dog owners, like you may not see that right away. And I think for me, it's like the number one question I'll look at now when I work with these cases of maybe your dog isn't happy at the dog park, but they're happy with this activity they're doing with you, and they want to just stick with that. And I think kind of doing some of those very controlled, obviously through training at our facilities, is like you can see then like, wow, our dog would actually rather avoid or ignore or just do this. And if you actually take out the toy, you see a ton of usually I see a lot of like more displacement behaviors, or kind of just dogs. If you look at the kind of topics of like conflict resolution, like the ostrich, you'll usually see dogs kind of doing that. I know sometimes it's just hard to see that unless you actually go looking for it. Sometimes you just won't see that right away.
Yeah.
But it's there.
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah, I would definitely vote no
Yes.
toys at the dog park.
Megan?
Maybe if you're like at the dog park at a time when no one else is there and you kind of have it to yourself, then you can use a toy.
Fair enough.
Yes.
Yes. So when the dog park isn't really a dog park, it's just a private yard.
Are we going to talk about alternatives to dog parks? Because I feel like we've talked about how like problematic that they can be. And
Well, I think also part of it now, though, is if you're using it, right? Like bring down the arousal level before you go in, exercise before you go in, keep moving, avoid toys if you can, work on a really good recall. Like if you're going to use the park, here's how to use it.
Yeah.
And then I would love to talk about sort of what are some alternatives as well. But I think if you're going, there's things to keep in mind. I think the other one that we just haven't touched on is like, don't stay too long.
Oh, yeah.
Like most people stay at the dog park too long.
Leave them wanting more.
Yeah. And the longer you stay there, like self-control is a finite resource. So it's going to get depleted as they're navigating all of those social interactions. And I think it's always nice to say too, like if you think about social interactions, even if your dog is totally a social butterfly, like social interactions are tiring.
Yep.
Navigating social interactions is tiring, even if you love them.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you go to a birthday party and with like people who you love most in the world and you spend 3 or 4 hours there, you still kind of leave going like, right? Like that was fun. I'm tired.
I'm ready after 20 minutes, but
I know what I'm saying.
but the reason why I'm saying that is like, there's sometimes I do feel like it, but there are some dogs too. It's like, it's actually a lot less time than people think it is.
Absolutely.
Right.
And I think we see this often in like some of our play groups at Instinct too, like how many times we have dogs out with really carefully selected, small, well-managed play groups. And there's a decent portion of dogs who like 20-ish, 25 minutes in, they're like, I'm good. Yeah. They go stand by the door and they know we'll listen to them and be like, oh, you need a break? Okay. Or they'll start to drift out toward the perimeter and sniff, or they'll start to sort of gravitate toward one of the care team members and get really close to them and not want to go do anything else. And they're telling us in lots of their own ways, like, I've had enough. I'm done. My cup is full. Thank you. I need a break.
Yep.
Yeah. Like I really don't see anything lasting more than that kind of like that 30-35 minute mark. Otherwise we're going to see that, or we're going to see some like cranky play. Yep. And I think we see that too within other species, including us, where, I love that you brought up birthday parties. But I'm like, even kid birthday parties. I'm like, man, even with that sugar crash, like,
yes,
let's head home.
See the like fun sword play escalating into someone's getting pushed off the balance beam and like whatever, or like pushed out of the bounce house. Like, there will be tears.
Yeah,
and like. Just the nice thing about dog parks
is,
especially if you're going to one that, it's like, it's free, or you have your membership, so however much you use it or don't use it, it's free. In that way, it's kind of better than daycare, because if you do daycare and then your dog is there the whole time and, are they just roaming? Are they overstimulated? Are they getting enough like solo rest, safe, contained rest time? So it is really nice with the dog park that you can do a short visit, and that's true. Good
Agreed.
enough. I like that.
Yeah. Absolutely. And then, Brian, I know you mentioned at the top earlier too, just like going with the expectation that you might not go in.
Or you will leave early.
Or you'll leave early is a huge way to reduce risk if you're using the dog run.
Yes.
It's like, take a look at who's in there, take a look at the energy level, take a look at how many dogs are in there and say like, is this something my dog is likely to enjoy or not?
Yes. And the one other thing, and this I guess should be obvious, but I don't think it is, like a dog run is generally it's not a place where you go to like quote unquote socialize your dog if they have issues or kind of even if it's like they're good with 80% of dogs, but 20% of the dogs are getting some pretty big scuffles with, like the dog park will almost certainly make it worse. Best case scenario is nothing bad happens, but like that's a case where you might need, a well-run daycare or, play groups where you have like I think the important thing is like not every dog is a dog park dog.
Yes. And I think that so we talk about all the ways to reduce risk.
Yeah.
Like when should you just not use a dog park? You just named one of them.
Yeah. If your dog has any sort of issue. And again, that's not saying like they occasionally get in like a rawr and then it's done, like, and it can resolve itself. Like, I think that's a good thing too. Like if you see dogs, if there is, because conflict's going to arise in a dog run, like if it seems like they can resolve it to themselves quickly and return to baseline. So then like they don't get in a scuffle and then they're just like looking around for the next person to beat up, like or looking for the next threat. I feel like that's, that's really important. But yeah, if your dog has any sort of issues, that dog parks are not the place. Yeah.
I would agree with that. I think if you have a puppy,
absolutely,
the dog run is not for you because of the unknown factor and because they're so impressionable. So like to your point, if they go and they have not a great experience, that's going to probably have a much bigger impact on them than if your dog has been to the dog run 200 times and then has one bad experience. They'll chalk that up to like, well, this was just an off day or it was that dog or I had a yucky time versus dogs are scary and dog parks are scary and being around dogs is scary.
Yeah. And I think we all have on this call, like we all have experiences with people where like with puppies who had a really bad experience and it really impacted their development in terms of like reactivity or fearfulness. So
yeah. And if you did that and your puppy had a bad experience, please don't feel bad. Like people are under the assumption that they should take their puppy or their dog to the dog park to socialize.
Yes.
Right. Like there's nothing to feel bad about there. It's more so just information that if you're getting a puppy or if you have one and you're thinking, should you go? No, you shouldn't. It's really important to find other ways for your puppy to interact with friendly, vaccinated, appropriate dogs. The dog run is just not a good fit for it.
Yep.
In my opinion.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah. Same. Yeah. It's not worth the risk.
Yeah.
And I think even if your dog, doesn't have a bite history, but really does spend the entire time cowering or hiding or like trying to get behind you and just doesn't like the dog park, I don't think it's a good idea to try to habituate to them by continuing to go when they're sharing all this signal that says like, oh, this is not the place for me. And I don't want owners to feel guilty, like, but my dog has to socialize. They have to make friends. Sometimes people say, can you teach my dog how to be friends with other dogs? And I was like, why would I do that? Like they have you, they're, like maybe let's a parallel walk. Maybe let's sniff the pee where another dog peed. Let's have a lot of other experiences that don't necessarily involve bodily contact, accidental on purpose or whatever. There's a lot of ways to socialize your nervous dog outside of the dog park.
Well, and I think even at that point, Megan, like it's even, can you teach my dog to play with other dogs? Like potentially they may really enjoy it. Well, let's do some more controlled work that's lower stress to see the dog park is not a good fit to do that and may never be a fit for their preferences.
Yep.
They might enjoy interacting with dogs. And to your point, in other ways, it may look like actual one-on-one play that they love with a dog that they know, or it may look like parallel walks, or it may look like, I hate dogs. I don't want to spend any time around them. That's more rare.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's pretty rare for a dog just to not have the desire to make dog friends at all, ever in any circumstance. But totally happens. Or it's not safe for them to do it based on their history.
Yeah.
But I do love that. I think it's a really important point that like if your dog is fearful or nervous or whatnot, it's not really about teaching them to like the dog park. It's about exploring, is interaction with other dogs something that actually is valuable and helpful and fulfilling for them? And if so, what are some other ways that we do that? which maybe leads into your question earlier, Megan, like, can we talk about alternatives?
Yeah.
Unless we want to take the conversation somewhere else.
Nope.
But
Yeah.
That's good.
But yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna add like too, like if your dog has any type of, they got spayed like even 10 days ago, or they had hurt their leg 2 weeks ago, that is something that comes up so frequently for me where it's like I can't ignore that when we're talking about moving forward. And I mean, there's probably so many other medical things that pop up, even if they're pretty subtle. I think that I would kind of more, because I think everyone knows that they break their leg or they have a pretty severe surgery, but like some of the more really small things, like they're 2 weeks out from being treated for Lyme disease, or they're sometimes if they're, you know, just kind of going through that kind of really like that juvenile stage too, where they have maybe going through like a sensitive period, or I think you'll see it in your dog, but sometimes those like really subtle, I'm kind of feeling icky today, and you go there frequently, or you go there 2-3 times a week.
Yes.
Skip it. Even if you think your dog is just going to tolerate it, that one's like such a gray area, but really, really look at that with your dog. I know sometimes like we can definitely take a look at like as they age and preferences start to drop, or start to get smaller. But mostly like my big one would be is like if they have something going on where they're just kind of feeling up themselves, just avoid it, especially for that really pro-social
so glad
dog.
you brought that up, Trina. That's like such an important point. If they just feel a little bit off, if they're recovering from something, maybe if you were like traveling and out of your neighborhood for a long time and you just got back and you're like, I'm tired. Your dog's probably tired too. You know, give them the day off from the park. Give them a few days off from the park. So I think that's awesome.
Yeah. And also like the health thing, like that really is a big thing. And all like, and I mean, you might know this with Murphy, but but like some dogs as well. If your dog is maybe limping or, you know, doesn't look like they're moving, I guess, structurally normal. Like sometimes, well, one is they're probably not comfortable enough to go in there anyways, but some dogs like that is just, that's like, they're living their life like that, but also they can become a bit of a target for other dogs sometimes as well. So you just have to be a little bit careful with that. Like I find dogs who maybe only have 3 legs, those types, like I generally don't recommend they go to dog parks because some dogs will, I don't know whether they're taking advantage of it or they see however they perceive it, but they do perceive something. And I do think sometimes those dogs can be at risk, especially if they're smaller as well. So it's just something else to be aware of.
That made me think of one more question before we talk about alternatives. I'm just curious about people's answers. Intact dogs in dog parks, yes or no?
I won't take my intact dog to a dog park.
Do you think people should be allowed to take their intact dogs to dog parks?
I think people should know the risks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
then they have to make a decision, right? And then maybe they go at a not very busy time of the day and there's only like females there and it's fine.
Yeah.
Spayed females.
Yeah.
No puppies here.
Yeah, I feel like it's at the risk of kind of sound like, you know, it is your choice and those choices come with consequences. Would I do it? Probably not. I think even if it went fine 99 times, that 100th time would just make it would feel not worth it. Have I seen them? Yeah. Have I seen my dog be like, I don't know if there's a term still being used, but like, does his tail go super up and down like a scorpion's tail? Yes. Does recall come in handy then? Yes. Well, your dog probably, I would say good chunk of dogs are going to react differently to that dog. And it just seems like such a smaller population of dogs that don't care or don't seem fazed or bothered. So I just kind of think I would really think about it.
I think it's more common, right? A lot more people are delaying neutering. So I think it is starting to become a larger population that maybe we need to have separate parks.
Well, I know for me, it's sort of like, I mean, dogs that are intact should be allowed to go to a dog park. I don't think that we should discriminate against intact dogs, especially when it's like they're just being themselves. Like they're just like we didn't do a surgery to remove their reproductive parts. Like I feel like that's like a weird, like that. The guy, I feel like they should be allowed in there. And we've had lots of intact dogs in our, with at Instinct and everything. come in and do play groups and do fine. However, what I will say is if I had a dog that was intact, I would not take them to a dog run.
I agree on both parts of that.
Because
Do you
there
think
are
our
dogs
listeners know why? Does everybody know what we're talking about?
Well, yeah, and I think it's helpful to get opinions about because I know to what you were, I think, starting to say, Megan, I know we have lots of folks who come in who say, my dog does well at the dog park, except when an unneutered male comes in and he can't handle that. Can you teach him to unneutered males? Or there's things like that where dogs, that's a sore point. It's a challenge for people, is that some dogs will be aggressive toward dogs who are intact, right? Particularly males,
mostly males.
Yeah. And then intact females can just attract a lot of attention sometimes, which then can spark fights between other dogs. So that's sort of where this question comes from. I would agree that I don't think we should prohibit intact dogs from using parks, because in an ideal world, if you're taking your dog to a dog park, they should be flexible and socially flexible enough that they can interact with the dog, whether they're intact or not, at some level, right? Even just be there in parallel. Yeah. I mean, they have to be best friends or anything like that. But I would also agree that if I had an intact dog and all our dogs just are rescued and were fixed when we got them, so I wouldn't take them because they can often be such a target.
Yeah. I think it's if I'm looking just through my lens, but even also all the play groups that we do at Instinct, it's more common for me to see that dogs perceive that as an issue than the dog that's unaltered feeling, being naughty in any way, or I don't know, I want to say the word naughty, but I'm with you then with they shouldn't be prohibited from entering. It just I think it does carry more risk. I think we are all definitely in agreement on that one. And I think we're all I probably I wouldn't expose my dog to that. Even if they got all those boxes checked off that we mentioned earlier, that doesn't eliminate what could happen to them. And there's so many uncontrolled variables then when you enter a dog park. So you do sign up for it. But to Megan's point, hopefully we can tell you guys that you are signing up for that.
I guess it's what Brian was saying.
Know.
I think it would be wrong to say oh, your dog is intact, so you can't come. I wouldn't want to punish people who are making that decision for their dog based on health and growth. It doesn't seem fair. And I don't think that people who keep their dogs intact are irresponsible. I should state that positively. Responsible owners will keep their dog intact for a number of reasons for a longer and longer time. And they shouldn't be punished for that decision because they're still being careful and taking precautions. And it's not like they're trying to have babies. They just want their dog's growth plates to close or whatever. So I don't think it's right to punish them.
I've got to be perfectly honest. I think the intact, well, at least we're talking about males right now. I think most of them I've seen dogs who had humping problems were generally all neutered.
Yeah.
To be perfectly honest, I feel a lot of the intact males I've seen generally, I honestly, I don't know if I can even think of one.
Yeah, when we're talking about sort of that persistent, excessive, this is how I interact with dogs, I hump them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Knowing that
Johnny
we're in New York
Cash.
City.
My poodle, Johnny.
I mean, the caveat there is we're also training in New York City where every dog, most dogs are neutered and spayed. So it's going to, our whole sample size is skewed, but yeah.
So I know that got us a little off topic, but I was curious because it is something that I think affects people in different ways.
Yep.
Really good
so I know
question.
we're coming to a close. If we want to think about for everything we've talked about, if you feel if someone feels hey, their dog falls in some of the reasons we talked about where it's you're on the do not go list, right? Or you're not on that list, but you also just feel given your local park and all the things we talked about in terms of managing risk, it just feels maybe dog park's not a great fit for your dog or your dog doesn't seem to enjoy it. I guess what else can people do, especially if they don't have a backyard to give their dogs physical energy outlets and then socialization opportunities or play opportunities?
I've had a couple clients who have had can I say a brand name? If not, you're going to edit this out. Sniff Spot, where you go and rent someone's backyard. And it's really worked well for a lot of reactive dogs who don't, for whatever reason, don't have or can't have a fenced in backyard, that they can go a couple of times and then they can play fetch if that's what they want to do, and no one interrupts them.
Yeah. Yep. That's definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. I've definitely seen that. Yeah. Way more common now, which is pretty cool. Being able to use like a long line, I think usually when I'm looking at giving them alternative outlets, sometimes it can be paired to because their dogs are on that do not enter list for whatever reason. Sometimes you can actually just take the time off and build things, whether it's the recall or, doing some work around their collars and stuff. But I find that really nice. And sometimes I kind of find it's a nice way to show our clients and show folks that their dog actually is really happy doing this, and maybe prefers it over dog play, but it's still a nice outlet too. So if they're trying to just, I think a lot of people have to find that when dog parks were closed for a good chunk of time. But let's say your dog is just like a no-fly zone, do not go in there at all. I think it just allows them to kind of have that feeling of autonomy and such a life reward. And I know we kind of talk about different ways that we can engage their nose and nose work or flirt pole, or maybe they can do those little kind of walks with like a family or friend's dog. I think that can be really nice for those dogs who are very dog selective but have dog friends. But I'm seeing this, being able to rent other places become more common. So I'm excited to see where that goes. I remember at one time, we kind of thought about renting out our play yard space at East Harlem. And then we're like, we use it all the time. So no, but, doing those like social sessions too with, I love doing them so much to the point where I'm never trying to write a dog off. I want people to feel like we're really taking the time to consider like all options here. And for those dogs that fall in the middle of like, yes, but there's risk, I think, man, I can't think of one that has gone wrong, even if it turned out to be, hey, your dog's not appropriate with any other dogs, like just the risk is too high. I think kind of being able to see that in a safe, controlled way is nice for a lot of people. But for the ones that are just like, this is what they needed, like select dog friends, and be able to build that profile with friends or family, I think goes such a long way. I know it's not an outlet you have to sign up for and you have to schedule it, but if you're not going to do that sniff spot or the dog or off, like going to a park with a long line, there are some other ways you just got to like dig into it. And if that's something you're willing to kind of give you the finances for.
So yeah. So for the part of, going to the dog park that scratches the itch of like socializing with other dogs, I think the nice thing is there's the potential that with a smaller sort of well-run daycare and going a half a day, like 1 or 2 days a week, that can be a really beneficial way for a dog to interact with other dogs. It's a little bit more controlled. There's a little bit more oversight, and that might be a better fit for your dog than going to the dog park. And then otherwise, I love one-on-one play. I think that's always my preference. And I think for a lot of dogs, just having the opportunity to interact with familiar dogs, a smaller set of familiar dogs, is what they want most anyway. So if your dog ends up with, hey, I don't go to the dog park, but I acquire 1 to 3 dog friends that my dog like meets up and goes for parallel walks with, and maybe eventually interacts with and then plays with, whether it's in a backyard or whether it's in like some shared little off leash space, like that can be everything that your dog needs and more. They don't necessarily need to spend time navigating interactions with a bunch of unfamiliar dogs. So I wouldn't feel bad about the fact that they don't necessarily get to do that. Any final thoughts about dog parks or dog park alternatives or?
So if we didn't scare the bejesus out of you and you're still going to go, yeah, I think we covered everything. I think just to wrap everything up, I know, like, I recognize that my opinion on dog parks are skewed because of what we've seen.
And because of where we are.
And because of where we are and the sizes and all those things. So there's lots of amazing, I know lots of people have great times at dog parks. But definitely if you're just got a new dog, just got a puppy, And if your dog has any sort of issues, definitely not the place to go. And my thing is when you talked about the itch was like, yeah, the long line, the, potentially a daycare, because some dogs do better in daycares. Some dogs do better with just like one-on-one play. And there are those dogs we have who aren't really good at one-on-one play, but we've had numerous dogs, and it's funny, like, just like, yeah, that parallel leash walk is like totally awesome for a lot of dogs. But yeah, I think there's
a time and a place, and for dog parks, and the time and place are potentially more limited than what most folks think.
Yes. Yeah. And there's nothing that says your dog has to go to a dog park if you don't want to go. Don't feel pressure to go.
Yeah.
We need more dog food commercials showing people happily doing parallel walks.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Good.
Yeah.
All right.
Thanks, Trina. Thanks, Megan. This was fun.
Yeah. It was fun. Nice chatting with you guys.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you for inviting us.
All right. We'll see you next
time.
week.